Bonjour, hello everyone. I think we'll start and we'll just let people slowly trickle into the webinar. So I'm Mai Murray from Uranus. Today's webinar is hosted by the International Network of Boundary Organizations on Adaptation, or INBOA for short, an international network fostering mutual learning among adaptation-focused boundary organizations to enhance their impact and increase their collective contribution to global adaptation. To learn more about INBOA and its activities, you can scan the QR code on your screen or eventually click on the link that will be in the chat. A few housekeeping rules before we start. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation. There will be a Q&A session at the end, but feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions throughout the presentation. The webinar will be recorded and available on INBOA's website. So today's webinar on measuring progress in climate adaptation aims to give some practical approaches from the perspectives of boundary organizations and policymakers, and also examine the role boundary organizations can have in informing and strengthening national and multilateral tracking and reporting processes. Let me introduce our first speaker, who will also act as our moderator. So Dr. Émilie Beauchamp is lead at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, where she directs and manages work on monitoring, evaluation, and learning for resilience, both at IISD and through the NAP Global Network, which supports developing countries to advance their national adaptation planning processes. She is also the co-chair of the Race to Resilience Methodological Advisory Group and lead author for Working Group 2 of the IPCC's 7th Assessment Report. So thank you, everyone, and over to you, Émilie.
Bonjour, hi, and thank you very much. And Mai, if you take the slide down, I will have a few slides to share. So, yes. Wonderful. So again, bonjour, hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you're joining from. Thanks a lot to INBOA and Uranus for the invite and to setting this exciting talk today. I'm delighted to be moderating the session on measuring progress in climate adaptation. As Mai mentioned, my name is Émilie Beauchamp. I'm a lead at the IISD, where I direct and manage work on monitoring, evaluation, and learning through resilience. We have a packed agenda today, so I'll start with just a brief overview to frame the discussion before turning to our esteemed speakers. There is a Q&A after the speakers, so please do use the chat to share questions and we'll collect them as we go along. Now, let me start with the global moment we are in, because the context has significantly shifted in the last few years. Since 2023, the global architecture for accountability and reporting on adaptation has significantly taken shape. But also, climate changes and events and shocks are increasing. So understanding what works, how it for whom, is really critical to improve and to accelerate adaptation actions globally, effectively and equitably. So here's a short recap of some global milestones from the UNFCCC recently. This includes, in 2023, there is the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience that gave us, for the first time, actual targets for adaptation under the UNFCCC. And that helps us to assess progress towards the global goal on adaptation under the Paris Agreement. Now, that same year, the first global stocktake, which assesses collective progress of the Paris Agreement, showed us something quite uncomfortable. When we tried to assess collective progress, the adaptation evidence base was thin, fragmented, and inconsistent. Since then, there has been the UAE BELAIM work program that has delivered 59 global indicators at COP30 just last November in 2025. This is meant to be a real step forward. However, the process was quite top down and has been contested. So it's unclear still what and how much of the indicators should be taken up by countries and by other actors. And this is going to be discussed at the next SB session in June. And we now have the BELAIM to this vision that will keep shaping this agenda through COP32. So still some uncertainty. That means there's a critical question hanging over everything with the second global stocktake starting this year. The second global stocktake is a big landmark shining light on what the Paris Agreement has accomplished or has failed to. So what will get actually reported and by whom? We have targets, we're building indicators, but there are missing pieces on connecting the evidence for adaptation process. So where does the architecture break down when we think about measuring climate adaptation? Because it's not like there's no data. That's a misunderstanding that has somehow passed, but rather people reporting and deciding don't necessarily have access to the right data and all the data. Countries report through biennial transparency reports, adaptation communications, progress reports, but those systems are built for domestic accountability, not necessarily to feed into global frameworks at the same time. So there's an adjustment to be made here. Then we have subnational and sectoral data where most of the adaptation actually happens, but that rarely gets aggregated upwards or not systematically. So boundary organizations, non-state actors and platforms like INBOA, IPAM, the Race Resilience, they're generating rich evidence, but it's not necessarily flowing into national and global stocktaking in a consistent way. Or is it? So we'll hear more from our participants today about this. And just to say, this figure from our own, the NAP Global Network 2025 synthesis report on MEL in NAP documents shows how many different reporting instruments countries are trying to juggle simultaneously. So data exists, but connections are lacking again. So that brings me to the role of organizations like those represented on the panel today. Boundary organizations are uniquely positioned to close these gaps, supporting countries to build MEL systems that are nationally owned and relevant while aligning with global frameworks, translating between national evidence and global reporting language, and helping aggregating data across scale. So it's not a peripheral role, it's a structural and critical one. And the window matters. So the global stocktake data collection phase is starting this year. So that's exactly what we're going to be exploring with our panelists today. We're going to hear from boundary organizations on how different actors in different contexts conceptualize and measure adaptation progress, with which methodologies and how this prioritize. We'll also hear on how their efforts are informing and strengthening national level tracking and contributing to the multilateral and global processes. So thank you so much and welcome to the panelists. I'm now going to stop my presentation and ask all the panelists to kindly turn their cameras on so that I can introduce them. So today we are delighted to have with us Ms. Srijita Dasgupta, Vice Chair of the International Platform and Adaptation Metrics, or IPAM, and Global Lead for Climate Change Adaptation at CABI. We have Ms. Majinda Magendratajan, Senior Policy Advisor in Environment at Environnement et Changements Climatiques Canada, or ECCC in Canada. We have Dr. Abid Hussain, who is a Senior Economist at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, or ICIMOD. Mr. Saqib Hogg, the Managing Director at the International Center for Climate Change and Development, or ICAD. And finally, we have Mr. Charles Tounui, Research Associate and Engagement Coordinator for the Africa Research and Impact Network, or ARIN. So thank you very much for your presence today, dear panelists. I have questions for all of you, and I think you have received them. May I kindly ask if there's I think, Srijita, are you happy with us to start with you?
Yeah, that's fine. I need to share my screen quickly.
Wonderful.
Right. Can everybody see my screen?
We're all good. Go for it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Amelie, and the International Network for Boundary Organizations on Adaptation, INBOA, for inviting me to this webinar. It is an absolute pleasure to be part of the panelists of adaptation experts. My name is Srijita Dasgupta, and I am currently working at an intergovernmental organization in CABI, leading our work on climate change and agriculture. But today I am particularly representing the International Platform on Adaptation Metrics and all our members as the vice chair of this big network of adaptation practitioners in general. So just to briefly introduce IPAM, we were established in 2020 under the presidents of the then Moroccan COP presidency. As of this year, we are a big global network of 190 individual experts representing 49 countries globally. So it's quite a rich pool of experts we have currently. So as a knowledge sharing and a disseminating boundary organization, IPAM has been actively working on various different sectors, including AI, finance, agriculture, cities, water, convening diverse experts for webinars, for the development of common policy papers, and in particular, the adaptation metrics mapping evaluation framework, which I will briefly touch upon shortly. We are also very active in regional and global initiatives, including the Race to Resilience, the Adaptation Research Alliance, and also in different UNFCCC-led events. So more specifically, in recent times, a good part of the network, and I can also see Charles is here as well, we are currently finalizing our flagship publication on a tentative title being Tracking Global Adaptation Efforts and the Needs for Better Metrics in Climate Policy, which we hope to be published sometime this year, if not early next year. So as part of today's intervention, IPAM was requested to provide perspectives on what we are seeing as trends in adaptation metrics. So based on the work we have been doing, and this is by no means my own perspective, but a group effort of a few other colleagues and network members, I think what we are observing is, starting with the shift from moving from outputs to outcomes in general. So essentially, we are moving from counting activities to measuring more meaningful resilience and vulnerability reduction processes. We are also seeing a global demand for common indicators, that increasingly reflect local realities and sector-specific needs that also support global reporting processes. So bridging the global standardization and local context in many ways. We are seeing greater accountability for adaptation finance. So there is an increased focus on the who's, what's, how's, why's, and how's of adaptation investments, and whether this investment deliver measurable resilience benefits, and more importantly, trickle down to the vulnerable groups and communities. We are also seeing increasing demand to include gender and inclusion, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, participatory, locally led adaptation dimensions, and generally the integration of equity and inclusiveness in adaptation metrics development and implementation processes. There is also more push towards system-based and resilience-oriented approaches. So, for instance, if I may mention the interconnected natures of not just agriculture, but agriculture, climate, health, energy sector, ecosystem, livelihood. So bringing together all these sectoral approaches in a more holistic and systems level approach for adaptation, reporting, and monitoring. We are also noticing that there is a recognition of maladaptation risks, of the unintended consequences of certain adaptation actions that may lead to harm or inequity or dependency or risk transfers from one sector to another. So the general recognition is there that we have to be more intentional in our adaptation action so that it does not, it leads to positive outcomes and not negative in the process. And lastly, something that IPAM is also a strong advocate of, that we need more decision-oriented metrics, so adaptation metrics that can be increasingly designed to support and inform policy planning, learning, governance decisions. We have also noticed that there's a growing shift towards these kind of tools, technologies, and capacity development around decision-oriented metrics in the process. So one of the pieces of work that IPAM has done, but this was beyond my tenure, so apologies if there are questions I may not be able to answer. But this was developed with a group of experts under IPAM. But it's the adaptation metrics mapping evaluation framework, and that was developed to assess the relevance and the coverage of adaptation indicators generally. And the idea is that it helps to identify gaps in indicator measurement. So less of a monitoring tool, but more of an evaluation of the adaptation approaches. So it essentially evaluates indicators across 5 key aspects and dimensions, with employing 3 analytical lenses. I will provide a link in the chat if this is of interest to the webinar participants. But I think the interesting part of the AMI framework is that it really uses a whole systems perspective, recognizing the interconnected nature of systems and subsystems in adaptation generally. Originally, the AMI framework was designed to be more for meta reviews across projects, but we have evidence now, and it's part of the publication as well, where this has been applied to individual project evaluation and monitoring, mainly in the global north context. And lastly, to also conclude, we are also now seeing an increasing shift towards big data, the use of AI, geospatial tools, and technology in general for adaptation metrics. So a piece of work that IPAM has currently undertaken is to develop or understand or help understand what could be good guidelines or principles for responsible use of AI and data governance in adaptation metrics. So with that, I will end here. So that's just a brief overview of what IPAM is doing in order to bridge evidence and implementation in adaptation. But I look forward to the discussion later on. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosita, for sharing and outlining some of the main patterns that IPAM has been seeing, and for sharing about the AMI framework. I'll now turn to Miss Magenta Tajan from the ACCC. Do you have a presentation, Magenta?
No, it will just be verbal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Then take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maginda Thajan. I am acting manager of the Adaptation Policy and Intergovernmental Partnerships team within the Climate Change Adaptation Policy Division of Environment and Climate Change Canada. So my team works on monitoring, evaluation, and reporting on all things related to the implementation of Canada's National Adaptation Strategy, as well as advancing a number of our implementation mechanisms for implementing the strategy, particularly with relation to multilateral partnerships. So just to provide a bit of an overview, in June 2023, we released Canada's first National Adaptation Strategy, and it set out a vision for climate resilience across Canada. The strategy includes transformational long-term goals, medium-term objectives, and near-term targets to guide the way. It's underpinned by a set of guiding principles, and it is organized by across 5 interconnected systems. These systems are health and well-being, disaster resilience, infrastructure, nature and biodiversity, and economy and workers. As well, the strategy identifies foundational elements that are necessary to underpin effective adaptation. The strategy is being implemented through 3 primary mechanisms: the Government of Canada Adaptation Action Plan, federal, provincial, and federal territorial action plans, and Indigenous-led action. It was released with a suite of 13 indicators that set out the initial monitoring and evaluation framework, and these indicators were designed to begin measuring early progress on adaptation. And the strategy included a commitment that this framework would be refined and improved upon on an ongoing basis. So that is the work that my team has been undertaking over the past year. We've been working on the first update to the monitoring and evaluation framework, and we hope to release that later this year. This update really focuses on ensuring that we have metrics to track progress towards the 25 near-term targets in the National Adaptation Strategy, as well as additional indicators to help us monitor the state of climate resilience across Canada more broadly. The updated framework will also closely link the goals, objectives, and targets within the National Adaptation Strategy in a bit more of a logic model perspective. And it's really intended to help us measure how implementation is going and identify where there might be opportunities to strengthen our national approach to adaptation. So what you can expect to see in the updated framework will be a much broader set of indicators. We'll have just over 45 indicators in the new framework. To the extent possible, these indicators will leverage national data sources. And in some cases where co-development of indicators is required, we are continuing to work with partners on those, and will report progress towards those targets or objectives in a more narrative way. And maybe I'll just also note the design of the National Adaptation Strategies Monitoring and Evaluation Framework is incredibly iterative and evergreen. It is intended to be updated as more data and indicators become available. And it's kind of an ongoing learning process. As we achieve targets, we may set new ones, we may increase ambition, we may course correct in certain areas. And that's really the purpose of the monitoring and evaluation framework. And then another note also is the national M&E framework is not exhaustive and exclusive of other monitoring frameworks for adaptation across the country. And so it's really intended to complement and help us measure progress towards implementation of the National Adaptation Strategy specifically, but also be strengthened by existing monitoring frameworks as well. And I'll leave it there for that.
Super. Thank you, Meginda. And straight on time. Thank you so much for the very efficient presentation, and great to hear about the developments in Canada. I will now turn to Dr. Abid Hussain from ECMUD. Abid, would you have slides, or you'll be speaking without slides?
I don't have slides. Thank you so much,
Wonderful.
Emily. Yeah, so I will start with some introduction to my organization. It's International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. We call it ECMOD. It's an intergovernmental regional knowledge center, and we support our regional member countries, means Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, China, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, and Bangladesh. So we mainly focus on hilly and mountain areas, ecosystems, the socioeconomic issues, and risks related to climate change and non-climatic shocks. We support these countries particularly to reduce risks in mountain areas through generating context-specific data from mountain areas to prepare for adaptation, generate evidence on effective adaptation solution, make it available for use of these regional member countries for better preparation for adaptation. We do not directly measure the progress on adaptation like other organizations. We just produce data, scientific evidence, and of course, pilot solutions. A few examples of contextual data are land use change, drought forecasting, crop area estimation, snow cover change, cryospheric changes, variability in water availability in river basins, large and small socioeconomic studies and surveys whenever they are needed on vulnerabilities with specific focus on agriculture, migration, poverty, and GSE-related issues. We test and pilot various context-specific solutions, particularly on early warning systems, climate-resilient agriculture, spring shade management, renewable energy use in different sectors, rangeland management, and human-wildlife conflict, and several other areas. We also promote macro approaches like regional cooperation using the approach of river basin management and landscapes. We have one dedicated initiative. We call that Regional Information Services. It has graduated from one very specific database. We call that database as regional regional system for database. And now that database has graduated to regional information system. It's a dedicated initiative. Under this initiative, we are hosting all the data we are actually collecting that is coming from our piloted solutions, our surveys, or as I mentioned, the studies we produce. We also produce larger thematic assessments. We conducted one assessment that is called High Map Assessment in 2019. It's one of the highly cited assessment. That assessment is a kind of IPCC type of assessment, but at regional level, which covered mainly mountain ecosystems in regional member countries. After that, in 2023, we produced another assessment. We call that high-wise assessment that mainly focused on cryospheric and changes in water availability and its impacts on people's livelihoods and economies. We also produce regional energy report in 2025. Now we're in the process of producing one outlook on springs which are main source of water in Hindu Kush Himalayan countries. Around 8 million people are reliant on springs for water security. So all these assessments we have we have one solutions portal also, we have regional information system also. We accumulate or consolidate evidence from solutions and scientific publications, and we make these available for governments to be used in policy processes, but also for better preparation for adaptation. Very recently in GGA process, I was one of the 78 experts also who worked on indicators. We also supported governments to bring mountain context in the indicators. So in the back end, we worked a lot with the regional member countries. Overall, if we see the mandate of my organization, we do not directly, as I mentioned, work on the measurement of indicators or monitoring of indicators, but we support our governments through generating evidence and testing viable solutions in different contexts so that they are well prepared for their adaptation plan. This is over from my side. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And please, by all means, for all presentators, please do share some of your key, maybe like your top 3 publications that might be useful for our audience. That would be very appreciated. Should be mentioning a lot of great resources. I'm now going to turn, we have 2 more speakers. I'm going to turn to Mr. Saqib Haq. Saqib, are you also with or without presentation?
Thank you, Amelia. Without presentation, I'll just speak if that's all right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everybody on the call. So my name is Saqib Haq. I'm from the International Center for Climate Change and Development. We're a research and capacity building think tank based in the Global South in Bangladesh, but we work across several of the LDCs and SIDS in a lot of the research and capacity building work that we do. And being one of the founding organizations for working on the principles of locally led adaptation, which some of you may be familiar with. So our main focus has been looking at how do these global goals on adaptation, other metrics and assessments that are happening in understanding adaptation gaps, what does that mean for local organizations that are feeling the crunch on the ground? How do they engage in a process such as this within their own systems at the local level, in the national level, and then building this up at the global level at the UNFCCC and COPs? So just before we got into Belém last year at COP31, when we were looking at the plethora of all the different indicators that were coming out of the Global Goal Initiative, we had done a small assessment and a brief policy looking at how do these global goals align themselves at the local level? What does the local organizations need to really be able to do to understand and be able to adapt to these reporting metrics that are coming through? And what we found at the time going into Belém, of the previous 100 or so indicators that existed, are largely about 30% of them were already aligned. They had a understanding of how local organizations could fit into reporting and understanding the adaptation initiative that they were doing in being able to understand and monitor what is being done. However, a vast majority of those indicators were not suitable at the local level. And these we're looking at in terms of not only the type of data that is needed. In certain cases, local data is not relevant. We're looking at more district level, divisional level, provincial level to really understand the adaptation happening at scale. However, what was really more shocking and distracting to understand is that local organizations had no infrastructure to collect that data. So when we're really looking at being able to understand how these adaptation initiatives are being successful, local organizations, whether they're subnational actors from the government, whether they're women's associations, whether they're youth networks, persons with disabilities, NGOs, and the vast majority of work that happens on the ground from communities, there was really no infrastructure for us to collect that type of data. So when we're looking at concrete examples about where adaptation is happening, but we're not really understanding on the benefits of this type of adaptation. How can we really put these adaptation initiatives at scale? What's working? What are some of the challenges? We're cutting out a vast majority of the actors that are really doing adaptation initiatives on the ground, and we're doing reports for the sake of doing reports. And quite a lot of the times, all these monitoring efforts that we've really seen, they come in a form of just being able to count what has been done with the funding, what type of beneficiaries have been impacted, how have we been able to help them, but really no understanding about whether adaptation is taking root in these activities, whether we're able to actually track a betterment of quality of life for those most affected on the ground. So maybe jumping just a little bit ahead on the question that Alan put on the chat, for us, really, the emphasis on adaptation understanding is at the local level. The locally led initiatives are really where we think that the type of data and evidence needs to be generated, and how we can really make sure that those actors are able to contribute into their own national systems where they're largely invisible at the moment. And just one last point on being a proud member of the INBOA network, I believe these types of discussions and these types of organizations are critical in making that sort of data come through, because putting that onus on local organizations and communities to collect the data, interpret it, analysis, and then put it into policy is really a burden that shouldn't be theirs. It's something that there are organizations that should be able to step in, and the funding cycle should really look into how to make sure that these types of adaptation monitoring activities happen in an ecosystem. They happen with other people in ground. It's not one organization on the ground that needs to do everything. So I'll end with that and happy to take any questions going forward. Back to you, Emily.
I really like that message, Shakib. Like, it needs to be thought about in terms of the ecosystem of actors rather than putting burden, especially on those who are working with the most vulnerable and with often the most limited resources. Thank you so much for this. And we will turn to our last speaker, Mr. Charles Tonuy. And please, if you're with us. Yes. Charles, can you?
Yes.
Charles, désolé.
Yes. Thank you so much.
I assume you're francophone,
yes,
but maybe
yes.
not.
So
I'm sorry.
let me share this page. I hope everyone is able to see. Can you see?
Yes, we
Lama
can see.
yes. So thank you so much, and it's great to meet Zagib, whom we have met severally in Bangladesh and also in different places, particularly to understand community-based adaptation to climate change, courtesy of our late Professor Salim. And it's good that you have been now building on, especially to understand the co-production process for locally led indicators. So I've been engaged in this process some times back, and the LAMA team, the Africa Research and Impact Network team, with partners, courtesy of funding from IDEA, the Step Change Program, they've been able to facilitate development of local indicators, locally led indicators, and also develop a digital platform that the community-based organizations are interacting with the different as stakeholders. So let me take you straight to the strategic component. Like this page shows some of the climate adaptation initiatives. So there was a triangulation in terms of mapping adaptation initiatives in Africa, and you can just log in. I'll share the link later. So if you click, for instance, Kenya, you can look at some of the initiatives. You click Tanzania, so they are close to quite a number of adaptation initiatives. And this was the foundation in terms of looking at how different programs are framing indicators for locally led adaptation. The next step that the team took is to use Kenya, one of the regions in Kenya, which has got 14 subnational governments and is being also replicated in Benin, is to really facilitate now ground local co-production process. So using one priority sector, for instance, agriculture, when you come to the LLA indicator metrics, for instance, you realize that priority indicators at the local level are actually quite specific. For instance, the farmers in this region are interested in terms of improved maize production, and then also they go even further granular in terms of, we would like to get 7 bags of maize per acre or 300 tons of sugarcane from the current 240 tons per acre. But now we triangulate also that with the subnational government. So what are the subnational governments in terms of indicators? So for instance, when you look at the 14 subnational governments here, I come from Bomet, it's in western part of Kenya, and you come to the food security. So if you look at the priority indicator that they've actually placed it in their subnational climate change action plan is the number of community members that have adopted climate smart agriculture. So you see it's getting broader as you go up. Now, when you come to the national, for instance, in Kenya, you look at the national climate change action plan, and you look at the priority indicator within the agricultural sector, you realize it's focusing, the national government is focusing on the enabling policies, that is the enablers, including the policies, contribution of youth, and then also looking at the adoption of climate smart agriculture. So that is what the platform is providing, is to provide, to facilitate especially the co-mapping of indicators that can help in terms of investment on the priority locally led indicators, but also direct the investments at the national level, subnational level, up to the local level. And there's a progress now being made in terms of linking them now to the GGA indicators. For instance, let me open this one indicator on agriculture on maize. You realize we did, the team did the cleaning of the indicators, qualify the indicators because sometimes they share as a statement or an aspiration. And then now we are looking at on the target relevance is to link now with the subnational, national, and the GGA indicators. And this is the platform that any stakeholder now can share the data, can upload, and we are working, the team is working with a number of community-based organizations which are digitally enabled. Of course, there's that component of analog where the number of them, they have been trained close to 100 so that they can do regular surveys and also converting into the digital platform. So this is one of the concrete work that the ARIN team, Africa Research and Impact Network, is now rolling out across Africa. Thank you very much. And I'll share the link so that you can also log in and then you can interact with it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Charles, for this presentation. And you took already one of my questions, and how does that link with the GGA? And it's a really great example of how that can be connected. I'm quite impressed. I'd like to start our panel. We now have a good 20 minutes. And I'd like to start our panel first on a brief discussion on measuring adaptation progress. And we know there is a lot of challenges, especially when it gets to connect local to global data. Some of you have mentioned it, the aggregation, but also there's different roles of different actors in the ecosystems. So I'd like to ask you, what are some of the lessons learned that in your context, in your area, what has worked best to aggregate or to work with measuring adaptation with data across different scales? And maybe you will say it's between like local and subnational or local and national. If you do local to global, it'd be great to hear, have you had this aggregation challenge and how have you tackled it, or how would a partner of yours collectively tackled it? And I'll take, if you can please raise your hand so that I see who would like to go first. Not everyone at the same time, please. Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Maybe just a quick reflection while others are getting their thinking hats on. So as I mentioned, quite a lot of the times, one of the challenges has been that local actors, particularly community organizations and networks, are not really where the data is getting collected for national level planning. So that has been one of the challenges, particularly in getting subnational, divisional level, provincial, municipalities, national ministries to really look inside, look down at their own networks and look down into sort of the infrastructure that they're working on as a way of gleaning sort of reports and evidence rather than just seeing them as monitoring logs that come through. So then that has been one of the local level challenges. However, at the global level, I would say because of the frameworks that have been existing within the COP process, for all the limitations that they had during the GGA sort of process, that had at least been able to sort of synthesize a level of understanding that these indicators initiative that were taken on needs to really address the local level challenges, needs to understand what's happening on the ground. And there was an openness within those sessions and activities to really try and embed the global goals as a way of really building up on the different stages that come up and feed into that process. So now that's still something that's in progress. That's not something that's been finalized and fixed as yet. But again, at the global level, there's an understanding that there needs to be a better enhancement of the quality of data, not just the sort of numbers that come through, but really what are those numbers saying? Are these communities being able to adapt? Are we facing the same challenges every 4 or 5 years? And what are the reasons that we're having to do that? And really using that sort of lever to get national governments, national entities to really look below and understand whether they're being adaptive or not. So I think, again, this is a process that continues. And as happens oftentimes when you're mixing governments and other sort of international processes, you get some sort of a momentum and then you go back by a couple of years. So this is a process that needs to keep reiterating itself. So I think, actors like ourselves really have the onus to make sure that the lessons that we learn now aren't lost. These are things that we capitalize on, and using different tools and methods, as many of the panelists have shown, are different ways for us to capture what has happened before, rather than having to always go through a 20-page report beforehand, but looking at dashboards, looking at different tools and metrics that are being used, and how these can really glean information coming from the local level.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive answer. And yes, Meginda, please go ahead. We have 15 minutes left, but we also have quite a few questions in the Q&A. So I'll ask you if you can keep it for maybe just a minute or two in your answers. That would be appreciated to give the space to everybody to share their perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just two quick reflections on lessons learned. I think currently we're going through the experience of thinking through how the national level data we have can feed into reporting on the global goal on adaptation and the indicators that were adopted at COP30. And it's quite challenging actually to find data sources that cover all of Canada that use similar enough methodologies that you can kind of group them together to be able to then feed into these broader indicators that don't really have a defined methodology or approach for them. One piece that we are exploring and I think could be a really good approach is to utilize narrative reporting wherever possible. So where we don't necessarily have exactly the right metrics, we could use a combination of indicators and narratives to be able to combine and tell the story a bit more clearly towards to describe progress towards a global goal. And then the other piece is a big lesson learned has been to make use of existing data. When we started working on the monitoring and evaluation framework for the National Adaptation Strategy, we found that there is a lot of existing data out there. And so we just needed to kind of find the right spaces and put it all together into the framework. And that is a lot easier than developing brand new data sources.
Amazing. Thanks, Meginda. So you're basically saying already Canada is doing a little bit of what Sakib is mentioning and looking at the data already that is there instead of asking for push notifications for new data. So thank you. Would there be any more challenges in linking scales or in aggregation?
So maybe Emily, I am
Yes.
struggling actually to raise my hand. I'm not that used to Zoom. Yes, we mostly use
Go ahead,
MS.
take the floor,
Yeah,
Abid.
yeah. Actually, I have been engaged in local level adaptations also. The same time I was engaged together with Charles in GGA process also. The bigger challenge we face that adaptations are very context specific. All countries have different contexts, mountain, desert, dry lands, plains, coastal areas, and XYZ thing. So it's very difficult to cover the context of all countries. Okay, global indicators have to be somehow somewhere comparable across countries, but countries need to have their own national processes also to capture all contexts. And within context also, for example, mountains or coastal, within those contexts also, they have to cover different socioeconomic groups, socioeconomic vulnerabilities across indigenous people, local communities, genders, and all that. So if we report only on activity level or in terms of programs or project in the global processes, actually we are missing out on those deep insights which are there actually in specific to context. So national governments and databases have to cover all those to truly capture the progress on adaptation, but also to report on global processes. If they just focus on the global processes, they will miss out the internal disparities. Over from my side. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I see Charles, please come in, and after Srijita.
Yes, let me address the scripture you asked. Who owns this data? Since you mentioned this is also an open platform, and we are actually working on the details about the organizations or individuals at the local community level. We anonymized, and then we are working on the organizations who are really interested to really work on a framework to really protect like more details about the data. But we are trying as much as possible also to get views from different organizations on how to really proceed based on also the interest of the local community-based organizations. They are interested to access the data at a very affordable cost, and also the protection of some of the details. So we will also welcome your views on that. I'd like to also to share one of the key challenges that among the challenges that the team faced is actually at the capacity at the local level, particularly at the community level. There is low investment on local adaptation, particularly on mapping of indicators, and that is really impeding the program. But of course, the process has already triggered some of the interest. So far, the local adaptation metrics team, they are part of the Kenya's national indicator handbook development, and they are really advancing on that. And also the subnational governments, they've developed interest. So the 14 county governments led by their secretariat are already in advance to sign a memorandum of understanding. And also the team is already leading an ad hoc working group. So there is that interest in terms of opportunity because there is already getting insight in terms of misaligned investment and also maladaptation really happening at the local level. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. And Srijita, would you like to add from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I swear my Zoom has a life of its own, so it was refusing to raise the hands earlier. But I think a lot of the challenges have been mentioned. But I think putting aside my IPAM hat, but also based on the work we do in agriculture, for instance, I think there is a general challenge of attribution here, because often it's very hard for us. It is hard, but also we have to be very, very careful when we say that certain outcomes are a result of climate adaptation. Because when we say, let's say agricultural productivity has increased, it can be because of climate adaptation, but at the same time, there is a role of better markets, there is a role of technological advancements, there is a role of youth and women inclusion. For instance, a lot of different factors come into play when we are making this attribution to adaptation. So especially in this complex socio-ecological systems such as agriculture and in the developing countries. What one of the panelists mentioned, the narrative-based and the process-based adaptation reporting is very useful for us. So we try to capture the layers of lessons learned as much as possible. We do short stories, every narrative, every sort of anecdotes we can collect from the farmers, from the local level governments. We work a lot with the local level governments. So everything that can be evidenced as part of reporting mechanisms. We try to be as rigorous as possible. So there's really a need for layered sort of mixed approaches, and which is also robust, instead of sort of like a simple causal attribution to adaptation, I guess. So yeah.
Thank you. This is super interesting, and I'm hearing a lot of using mixed data and different types, like the stories of change, narrative reporting and whatnot, because not everything that counts can be measured. So it's really important to remember that indicators are one part of monitoring, evaluation, and reporting systems, but they are not everything. An indicator indicates, it doesn't say everything. So thank you so much for making sure that we remind ourselves of this when we think of measuring progress. I see we have 5 minutes left. I would like to share a question from the audience. Some have seen Alain's questions, but I'm going to turn to Caroline's question, which asked that, building on the panelists' comments, by involving organizations in the monitoring, evaluation, and learning processes and approaching it in a coordinated way, does this also contribute, or how would you see this also contributing to the adaptation process itself, in a sense of like helping to form a certain sense of resilience and capacities? So if I reword in my own words, sorry, Caroline, but like what kind of capacities can boundary organizations really bring to the table by helping organizations and different authorities and actors in monitoring, evaluation, and learning? And I'll ask for very quick responses here. I would like to keep it to like 30 seconds to a minute. Just which capacities do you think that, or do you have an example that you have supported with your stakeholders? Yes, Meginda, please go ahead.
Just very quickly, I think Caroline already covered this in her note, but I think just being able to build capacity across jurisdictions, across partners, to be able to do this work, it brings everybody on board, and then you're able to think through problems and develop really strong indicators and metrics, and then also have everyone on board for data collection, for continued reporting, and just have that buy-in to continue to iterate and build on monitoring frameworks.
Yeah. So iterations and allowing space and whatnot. So yes, Akib.
Thank you. I already did a little bit of a response in the chat, but maybe just building on some of the discussions that have happened since. In terms of boundary organizations being able to add to this sort of diversity, it builds on Srijata's point, is that, boundary organizations really can have a little bit more of a macro understanding about what's happening from the various different activities. So adaptation is not only context specific for the sector that you're working in. There are other socioeconomic development theories that might be able to enhance that adaptation. And again, boundary organizations like ourselves, I think, are best placed to try and be able to decipher what were the other factors, what were the other things in the ingredients in the mix that really help that adaptation take root.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Great.
Yeah. Can I just quickly add
yes,
that I think one of the ways, similar to what Saki mentioned, I think one of the ways is to help countries or any level of governance to see that it's not always the methodological rigor that is important. That is 100% important, but also there are other enabling factors like, proper governance. Do you have those financial resources in place? Do you have coordinating mechanisms in place? The institutional capacity, integration across different, in horizontal and vertical integration across the different ministries, for instance, those are still not happening. And in many countries, we're still working in very siloed approaches. So there's definitely a role boundary organizations and generally development sector can play to help see the integration and alignment more clearly here.
Absolutely. And then I often see, as part of the global network and I, as the key role that as a boundary organization we play in bridging what happens in a UNFCCC to what should be taken forward by countries or subnational levels and whatnot. I've shared a couple of resources as well from the global network, including a free online self-paced course on monitoring, evaluation, and learning for adaptation. So please feel free to have a look. And I will open the floor. Would you have last few words from our panelists? You would like to say something that's been waiting on you, or something you really want to share and really hit the crowd with? Right. So I'll say, I think what I can say is that I've heard that it takes more than one actor to measure adaptation progress, because adaptation progress means different things to different people. And so it needs to be covered by different perspectives, by different types of data. And really the role of boundary organization is bringing these connections, doing some of the reporting, supporting actors in reinforcing their capacities so that they can take it more on, but also to do it as their own capacity as experts and as a role in the public space and in the global space. So on this note, thank you very much to our panelists. One round of applause. And I'm saying on behalf of Mai and Uranos that reminding people that the webinar recording will be available on the MBOA website shortly. And if you have further questions, I think you have our details or contacts, or otherwise Uranos can pass back more questions to us in the future. So thank you very much again to all the panelists and to Uranos and MBOA. Have a nice rest of the day.